The clock in the Ashcombe morning room struck the half-hour, and Marigold Ashcombe did not flinch, though her fingers tightened around the rim of her teacup until she was certain the porcelain would crack. Across from her, the Duke of Harrowden set down his own cup with the unbothered precision of a man who had never, in 29 years of life, been told to hurry. "You are late," she said. "I am exactly on time, Miss Ashcombe." His voice was the same low and measured thing it had been for the full 3 months of their engagement, and she had come to hate it with a particularity usually reserved for bad weather. "Your clock is fast. I noted it last week. You chose not to have it corrected." "I chose not to correct it because I like it fast. It keeps me honest. It keeps you," he said, unhurried, "at war with the hour." She set her cup down harder than she meant to. The saucer rang like a small bell, and the room, already too quiet, seemed to listen. Beyond the long windows, the gravel drive shone white in the spring sun, and somewhere upstairs, her younger sister Coralind was laughing at something that did not exist, because Coralind had been laughing at nothing for 3 days now, and it was starting to feel like a signal Marigold had not yet learned to read. The Duke, whose given name was Cassander Finch, and who had not used it in her hearing once, lifted his gaze to hers. His eyes were the particular gray of winter water, the kind that seemed to have been washed so many times the color had gone thin. "You wish to speak with me before the dinner tonight," he said. "Say what you intended to say." She had, in truth, rehearsed it. She had rehearsed it against her pillow at 2 in the morning, against the silver-backed mirror at 6. She had rehearsed it so thoroughly that she had forgotten, somewhere in the rehearsing, that the man she intended to say it to wasn't a mirror. He was a duke. He had been a duke since he was 19, and it had carved him into a shape that did not bend toward rehearsed speeches. "I wish to know," Marigold said, "whether you mean to go through with it." Something passed across his face. It was the ghost of an expression, the way heat above a candle bends the air without touching it. "Through with what?" "With me," she said. "With this. With any of it." "You believe I do not mean to marry you." "I believe," she said, "that a man who means to marry a woman sits closer to her than the width of a dining room. I believe a man who means to marry a woman looks at her when the clock strikes and not at the clock. I believe a man who means to marry a woman writes her something, anything, in his own hand, in 3 months of engagement. That is not a list of guests his mother has approved." "Ah," said the Duke. That was all he said. "Ah," as if she had passed him the salt. She stood. She had not intended to stand, but her body had decided for her, the way it sometimes did when her mind had run too long without sleep. "I am going to release you," she said. "I'm going to release you before supper. I'm going to write a notice for the Morning Chronicle tomorrow and spare us both the ordeal of this dinner, which we both know is intended to parade you through the county like a prize ram. I would rather be the woman who ended an engagement than the woman who endured one." He had risen when she rose, because his tutors had taught him to, but he had not moved otherwise. He stood on his side of the small table with his hands at his sides and his eyes on her face, and for the first time since she had met him in the long gallery at Harrowden on the evening of her 19th birthday, he looked at her as though he were genuinely seeing her, and not the diagram of the woman his advisers had recommended he engage. "Sit down," he said. "No. Sit down, Miss Ashcombe. Please." She did not know, afterward, why the please undid her. She had heard him say the word many times. He used it the way other men used punctuation. But something in the way he said it now, quieter than quiet, sat her down again. Her knees folded. She hated that she sat. He did not sit. He remained standing on his side of the table, and he spoke down to her, not with condescension, but with a strange, stripped carefulness as though he were choosing each word from a very small box. "I have been cruel to you," he said. "I did not intend to be. I was taught that courtesy was the whole of it. I was taught that a woman of your station wanted a man of mine, and that the arrangement between our families was the arrangement, and that sentiment was something we would arrive at in our own time, if we arrived at it at all. I was not taught," he said, and a muscle moved in his jaw, "that silence could be a form of unkindness. I am learning it. I am learning it from you." She stared at him. The morning room, which had always felt suffocating, seemed to have grown larger. The walls had stepped back. "I do not believe you," she said. "I know you do not." "Then why say it?" "Because you asked me," he said, "whether I meant to go through with it. And before you release me, I would like you to know that the answer is yes. I mean to go through with it. I have meant to go through with it since the evening we met. I have been," he said, and the word seemed to cost him something, inadequate. "Why you are telling me this now," she said. "Because," he said, "Coraland came to Harrowden yesterday." The name dropped between them like a stone into still water. "My sister," Marigold said slowly. "Your sister." "What did she want?" "She wanted," said the Duke, "to give me some information." She presented it as a kindness. She framed it as a warning a loving sister would only share with a man she wished to protect. "She told me a great many things about you, Miss Ashcombe, over the course of an hour in my own library. Some of those things were true. Some of them I already knew." "Some of them," he said, and his mouth did a thing that was not quite a smile, "I am almost certain, were invented in the carriage on the way over." Marigold could not feel her hands. "What she told you," she said. "That," said the Duke, "is the part I am not going to repeat to you today. I am going to repeat it to you tomorrow. When we are somewhere your mother cannot interrupt, and your sister cannot overhear. I am telling you now only that she came. Because if I sit across from her tonight at your mother's dinner, and she believes I have kept her visit a secret, she will be bolder. And I would prefer her," he said, very evenly, "not to be bolder." "Why you are warning me," she said. "I am not certain," said the Duke of Harrowden, "that warning is the word for what I am doing." "Then what word is?" He looked at her for a long moment. The Winterwater eyes had changed. They had warmed, not by much, but enough that she could see the change, and it frightened her more than his coldness ever had. "I will tell you," he said, "tomorrow." And then, because her mother's voice was already rising in the corridor outside, he bowed correctly and formally, and he was gone before Marigold could remember how to rise from her chair. She sat alone in the morning room with the fast clock and the trembling spoons, and from somewhere above her head, Coraland began to laugh again. The dinner began at 7, and by the soup course, Marigold understood that her sister had come to the table armed. Coraland was 3 years her junior, and had been, since the nursery, the beautiful one. The distinction had been made so early and so often that it had set into the family like a fact. Marigold had the sharper wit, the quicker tongue, the better seat on a horse. Coraland had the face. When they entered a drawing room together, strangers looked at Coraland first, and Marigold second, and Marigold had long ago stopped minding, because she had discovered, in her late teens, that being looked at second meant being underestimated, and being underestimated was a kind of armor. Tonight Coraland was wearing white. It made men forget their manners. She had put a pale blue ribbon through her hair, the exact pale blue of the Duke's signet ring, and Marigold had noticed it the moment her sister stepped into the hall, and she had known that tonight would not be a dinner. Tonight would be a siege. Their mother, Lady Penelope Ashcombe, sat at the head of the long table and directed the footman with small flicks of her lace fan, and she had the particular glitter in her eye that appeared whenever the family was on the point of a public triumph. She had placed the Duke on Marigold's right and Coraland on his right, and she was working her way through the first course with the serene momentum of a general who has already won the battle in her mind and is only waiting for the field to catch up. "So, Your Grace," Lady Penelope said when the fish came in, "I understand you have ordered a new carriage from Hatchett and Son. Coraland was telling me this very afternoon." The Duke lifted his wine. "Did she?" "She did. Coraland always knows these things. She has a talent for carriages. Could you not, darling?" Coraland smiled at the table. It was a small, dimpling, privately delighted smile that Marigold had watched her sister deploy since Coraland was 11 years old, and it had never failed to charm a single adult within range of it. "I do like carriages," Coraland said. "They tell you a great deal about a person." Marigold thinks that is silly, but Marigold has never paid attention to carriages. She likes books. She thinks books tell you a great deal about a person. "They do," Marigold said quietly. "Oh, only up to a point," said Coraland, still smiling. "Books can be borrowed. Books can be pretended. A carriage has to be paid for. A carriage cannot lie about what its owner can afford. Do you not think, Your Grace?" "I think," said the Duke, "that a great many things can lie, given sufficient motive." There was a small, peculiar pause. The footman, trained by Lady Penelope not to hear anything, nevertheless seemed to hear that. Coraland's smile did not falter, but the blue ribbon in her hair caught the candlelight, and for the first time in Marigold's life, she saw her sister's eyes go briefly and unmistakably hard. Then the fish course moved on, and Lady Penelope began a long and triumphant story about the churchwarden's niece, and Marigold did not taste a single bite of what she ate, because beneath the table, very quietly, the Duke's left hand had settled over her right. He did not look at her. He did not squeeze her fingers. He did not move at all. He simply placed his hand over hers, as though it had always been there, and he let it stay. She should have pulled away. A lady did not hold hands beneath a table. A lady did not receive the touch of a gentleman's bare skin in company. But his glove was off, and hers was off, because one did not dine in gloves, and the heat of his palm against the back of her hand was the only warm thing in the entire room, and she did not pull away. She did not pull away for the fish course. She did not pull away for the game. And across the table, Coraland, who missed nothing, noticed. When the ladies withdrew after the pudding, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Coraland linked her arm through Marigold's as they climbed the stairs toward the drawing-room, and she bent her mouth to Marigold's ear with the conspiratorial intimacy of a child telling a secret about a doll. "He held your hand," she whispered. "He did not," Marigold said, knowing it was useless to deny it. "He did. I saw. You ought to be careful, Mary. Careful of what?" "Of him," Coraland said, and her voice was gentle. So gentle, the voice of a kind nurse bandaging a small hurt. "He's being very convincing tonight. He has never held your hand in company before. And now, suddenly, in front of Mama, in front of me, he is making a performance of it. A man does not begin performing affection, sister, unless he knows that someone present is about to doubt it." Marigold stopped on the stairs. "What you have done," she said. "Nothing," said Coraland, widening her pale eyes. "I have done nothing, Mari. I only wonder, sometimes, whether a man like that could ever love a woman like you. I only wonder." She pressed a small, cool kiss to Marigold's cheek and went on up the stairs without her. Marigold stood alone on the landing, one hand on the banister, and listened to her sister's laugh drift back down from the drawing-room, and she felt, for the first time since the morning, the fast clock in the morning room strike in her chest where her heart should have been. She realized, standing on the stairs in her blue silk, with the banister cold under her palm, that somewhere between the soup and the pudding, the Duke of Harrowden had stopped being the man she was going to release. He had become the man she was afraid to lose. She slept badly, and she slept alone, and she woke before the house. The Ashcombe Gardens in the early hour were silver. There was still mist in the low ground between the rose walk and the orchard, and the gravel paths held the print of the head gardener's boots from his first rounds, and the air had the green, almost metallic smell that English country air has in April when the frost has not quite given up the argument. Marigold walked out with a shawl over her shoulders and no bonnet, because at this hour there was no one to see her but the thrushes, and the thrushes did not gossip. She had not expected to find the Duke on the stone bench at the end of the yew walk. He had come on horseback. He was in riding clothes, not morning dress, and his hair was slightly disordered by the wind, and when he saw her coming down the path toward him, he stood without hurry, and he said, before she could ask, "I could not wait until the calling hour." She stopped 3 paces from the bench. The mist curled between them. "You told me tomorrow," she said. "It is tomorrow," he said. "It has been tomorrow since midnight. I could not bear another hour of you not knowing." She sat. The stone of the bench was cold through her shawl, and she was grateful for it. She folded her hands in her lap, and she looked up at him, and she said, "Tell me what my sister told you." He did not sit. He stood in front of her with his hands loosely joined behind his back, and he spoke the way a man gives evidence, plainly and in order. "She told me," he said, "that you had been in love with a Captain Roderick Vellaway 3 summers ago, and that the attachment had been mutual, and that your family had broken it off because the captain's people had fallen in the world. She told me that you had never recovered from it. She told me," he said, "that on the morning you accepted my offer, you had wept in her arms for an hour." Marigold did not move. "Is any of that true?" he asked. "The captain existed," she said. "The rest is a house she has built around a real stone. I met Roderick Vellaway at a regimental ball when I was 20. He danced with me twice. He wrote me one very polite letter, which I answered. He went to Spain. He was killed at Vitoria the following summer. I was sorry, and I thought about him once or twice a week for perhaps 6 months, and then I thought about him less. That is the whole of it. I did not weep in Coralyn's arms for an hour on any morning of my life. I do not weep in anyone's arms. It is not a thing I do." She looked up at him, and she said, very calmly, "Why, she told you this." "Because," said the Duke, "she wishes me to break the engagement." "Yes," said Marigold. "But why?" He did not answer at once. He seemed to be choosing, again, from the small box of words. At last, he said, "I have a theory. I will not share it today. I would like to be sure before I share it, because it is not a theory that can be taken back once spoken aloud." "I will forgive you," Marigold said, "for one more day, for knowing something and not telling me." He let out a breath she had not realized he was holding. "There is another matter," he said. "I must also tell you this, because you asked me yesterday why I had never written to you in my own hand. The answer, Miss Ashcombe, is that I have. I have written to you 7 times. I have written you letters I did not send. I have them in a drawer at Harrowden. I did not send them because each time I wrote one, I read it back to myself and found that I had said too much. I found that I had written like a man who had already decided, and I did not believe I had the right to decide for you. I wished you to have the freedom to release me." "I understood," he said, "only yesterday in your morning room, that by refusing to write I had given you nothing to hold. I had given you only silence, and silence, I am learning, is a language I have used badly. Marigold found, to her astonishment, that her eyes were stinging. "You wrote me 7 letters," she said. "Yes. And you did not send one." "No." She looked down at her hands, and she said, before she could stop herself, "Do you remember what you said to me the first evening we met, in the long gallery?" He said, "I told you that the portrait of my grandmother had been painted by Reynolds, and that I did not much like her face. I said I preferred the portrait of the spaniel beside her. You laughed at me. It was the only true thing I said that evening. The rest was the speech my mother had written for me in the carriage." Marigold laughed. It was a small laugh, and it caught on something in her throat, and it came out closer to a breath than a sound. But it was a laugh, and he heard it, and a thing happened to his face that she had never seen happen to it before. It opened. That was the only word she had for it afterward. "It opened. I did not know," she said, "that you had noticed I laughed." "Miss Ashcombe," said the Duke of Herodine very quietly, "I noticed everything. The blackbird in the orchard kept singing. The mist kept lifting. Marigold was looking at her own hands in her lap and feeling, with a precision she did not want, that a line inside her had shifted somewhere it could not be shifted back from. Then, from the direction of the house, Coraline's voice called across the lawn, Mari, are you out there? Mama is looking for you. We have a caller." "Mari." The Duke stepped back once, as if the voice had struck him. "Go," he said. "I will send for you this afternoon. Whatever you are told in the next hour, Miss Ashcombe, I am asking you not to believe it until I have spoken with you." "Believe what?" she said, rising. "Whatever you are told." He bowed, and he was already moving toward the orchard gate, when Marigold, turning toward the house and her sister's voice, saw Coraline standing not on the lawn at all, but at the corner of the yew walk, no more than 30 paces behind her. Coraline was smiling. She had been there, Marigold understood with a cold that had nothing to do with the April morning for some time. The caller in the yellow drawing room was not, as Marigold had expected, a cousin or a neighbor. The caller was a woman she had never seen before in her life. She was perhaps 45, dressed in the kind of handsome black bombazine that advertises widowhood without insisting on it, and she had the composed, ageless face of a housekeeper who had been given the afternoon off. She rose when Marigold entered, curtsied, and said, "Miss Ashcombe, I am Mrs. Orpah Lindewell. I have been sent to you by your sister." Coraline was already seated by the window, pouring a fresh cup of tea. "Mrs. Lindewell has come from London," Coraline said pleasantly. "She has been a lady's companion for 19 years. Mama is considering engaging her." "For whom?" said Marigold. "For you, dearest. For your trip." "What trip?" "The one Mama and I agreed upon this morning while you were walking in the orchard," said Coraline. "A visit to Aunt Harriet in Tunbridge Wells. A little rest. It is very plain to anyone who looks at you that the strain is telling. You have not slept. You have not eaten properly." Marigold sat down very slowly. "Mrs. Lindewell," she said, "would you be so kind as to give us the room for 5 minutes?" "Of course, Miss Ashcombe," said Mrs. Lindewell, and withdrew with the silence of a woman who had been paid for her silences before. The moment the door closed, Marigold turned to her sister. "You eavesdropped on us." "I walked in the garden," Coraline said. "It is my garden also." "You listened at the yew walk. I happened to hear voices. I thought it was one of the gardeners, meeting a girl at a private hour. When I realized it was you, I left. You did not leave." "I left eventually," said Coraline. "Mari, please sit properly. You will crumple your skirt." "Coraline," said Marigold, very quietly. "Why do you wish me not to marry him?" Her sister's face did not change. It did not have to change. The answer lived in the small muscle beneath her left eye, and the muscle did not move. And that was how Marigold knew that her sister had prepared for this question days ago and had practiced, perhaps in front of a mirror, the precise arrangement of features that would accompany the reply. "I wish you not to marry him," Coraline said, "because I love you." Marigold waited. "I love you," said Coraline, "and I watch you. And I have watched you for 3 months in his company, and I have never once seen you look happy. You look braced, Mari. You look the way you looked at 14 when Papa took you to have the wisdom tooth drawn. You look like a woman enduring unnecessary pain. I do not want you to endure unnecessary pain for the rest of your life. I want you to be happy. And if ending this engagement is what it takes, then I will be the villain of the piece. And I will be glad to be the villain, because at least you will be free." It was, Marigold thought with a dim and distant admiration, a very good speech. If she had been in any other room hearing it about any other woman, she would almost have believed it. "And the captain," she said. "I thought you would wish him remembered," Coraline said at once. "I thought, if the Duke understood that your heart had once been engaged elsewhere, he would understand why you could not feel for him what a bride ought to feel. I thought it was a kindness to both of you. You invented an hour of weeping in your arms," I embellished. "You invented," Marigold said, "a grief I never had, and you used it to suggest to the man I am pledged to that I am dishonest. That is not embellishment. That is a lie told to a specific purpose." Coraline set her teacup down. Her mouth had thinned, very slightly, into the shape it made when she was about to be cruel and would afterward pretend she had been misunderstood. "You have always thought the worst of me," she said. "Always, ever since we were children. I do one thing you disapprove of, and it becomes the whole of me in your eyes. I try to protect you, and it becomes a conspiracy. I try to love you, and it becomes a plot. Do you know, Mari, that I sometimes think you married yourself to the idea that I am the wicked sister simply because being the wicked sister's sister is the only role in which you feel interesting." Marigold stood. "Tell Mrs. Lindewell," she said, "that she may come back in. I shall speak to her. I shall tell her, personally, that I am not going to Tunbridge Wells today. I am not going to Tunbridge Wells tomorrow. I am not going to Tunbridge Wells at all. If Mama wishes to dispatch me, she may do so in writing, and I shall answer her in writing. And we shall save the household the indignity of a scene." She crossed to the door, her hand on the latch, and she paused. "One question," she said, without turning. "Have you written to him today?" Her sister was silent for a long moment. "I wrote to his mother," Coraline said. "Not to him." Marigold closed her eyes. "To his mother," she said. "To the Duchess. She is a friend of Mama's. She is entitled to know, Mari, that her son is engaging himself in a situation that may cause him pain. What did you tell her?" "Only what I told him," said Coraline. "Only the relevant facts. I love you, Mari. I will always love you. You will see one day that I did this for you, and you will thank me." Marigold opened the door. She walked past Mrs. Lindewell, past the footman, past her startled mother, who was emerging from the library with an open letter in her hand, and she walked up the stairs to her own room. And only when the door was shut behind her did she allow herself to sit on the edge of the bed and understand, quite calmly, that her sister had that morning written to the Duchess of Harrowden. Whose letter, Marigold thought, her mother was holding. She did not, in the end, have to send for him. He came. He came at 4 in the afternoon, which was the correct calling hour, and he brought with him, as a chaperone, his own aunt by marriage, a brisk small woman in plum-colored silk, whom he introduced as Lady Merivale, and who, within 3 minutes of arrival, had declared the Ashcombe drawing room charming and herself in urgent need of a walk in the gardens to recover from the motion of the road. She took Lady Penelope Ashcombe with her. Marigold watched through the long window as the two older women disappeared down the lime avenue, Lady Merivale talking without pause, her mother listening with the rigidity of a woman who had been outmaneuvered in her own house, which left Marigold alone in the drawing room with the Duke of Harrowdane and a maid stationed at the farthest window for propriety. He did not sit. He walked to the fireplace, placed one hand on the mantel, and said, without looking at her, "She wrote to my mother." "Yes," said Marigold. "I know. She told me. My mother received the letter at 10:30 this morning. My mother read the letter at 11:15. My mother threw the letter into her own fire at 11. She then sent for her carriage and came directly to Harrowdane to inform me, in person, that your sister is a young woman of limited intelligence and unlimited ambition, and that I must not, under any circumstances, allow her to succeed." Marigold stared at him. "My mother," he said, "is not a warm woman. She is, however, an observant one. She has seen your sister twice. The first time was at our engagement ball, and she wrote to me afterward that your sister had smiled at you, across the room, in the manner of a cat watching a sparrow it has not yet decided to kill." I dismissed the remark as my mother's habitual severity. I was wrong. Marigold had sat down without meaning to. "She wrote to your mother," she said. "Yes. And your mother burned the letter." "Yes. And came to tell you to marry me anyway." "My mother did not use the word anyway," said the Duke. "She used the word quickly. Her advice was that we marry quickly." Marigold put her hand over her mouth. "I am sorry," he said. "I did not mean to make you laugh. I am not laughing. It is merely that I had not imagined your mother had the capacity to love anyone. She does not," he said, quite gently. "She has, however, a very strong sense of which side of a fight she is on. At present, she is on our side. I would advise you to accept the gift without inquiring too closely into its source." He came and sat down at last, not beside her, but in the chair opposite, and he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands loosely clasped, in a posture she had never seen him use before. It wasn't the posture of a duke, it was the posture of a man. "I was going to tell you my theory," he said. "Yes. Your sister," he said, "does not of you. That is the simple part. I believe you have known it for some time, and chosen not to know it, because the knowledge is too costly." Marigold did not answer. "Your sister is jealous of you," he said. "She is jealous of you in a way that is particular and old. I suspect it began before either of you had the vocabulary for it. I suspect it has been fed for years by every small preference shown in your direction. Your father's, your grandmother's, perhaps a governess's. I do not know the shape of it precisely. I only know that she has lived in a house where she was considered the beautiful one, and she has understood, at some level she does not admit to herself, that beauty was given to her as a consolation prize for what she lacked. And she has watched you be given, these last months, something she would have regarded as rightfully hers. Not me. I am not so vain as to think she wants me. But the position, the precedence, the being first, for once, out of a room. "You think she wants to be a duchess," she said. "I think she wants," said the Duke, "not to watch you become one. It is worse." The clock on the mantel ticked. "And what," Marigold said, "do you propose we do? We will not do anything rash. Scenes are what she wants. She has built this to be revealed in a scene. We will instead," he said, "do the one thing she is not prepared for. Be boring. Marigold laughed. The maid at the far window lifted her head and bent it quickly down again. Boring, Marigold said. Excruciatingly boring. We will conduct ourselves with the dullest correctness the county has ever witnessed. We will be seen in church. We will be seen at the lending library. We will call upon tedious people and admire their conservatories. We will be, he said, so tediously well-behaved that anyone who tries to spread a whisper about us will find the whisper dies in their mouth from sheer lack of fuel. And the Duchess, he said, my mother has offered to hold a small dinner at Harrowden on the 14th of May, to which she will invite precisely the 30 families whose opinion matters. She will announce before the soup that the wedding date has been advanced to the 1st of June. She will do this in such a way that no one in the room will dare to do anything but toast us. The 14th of May. The 14th. That is 18 days from today. Yes, Your Grace, she said. Cassander. What? My given name is Cassander. I would like you to use it. Not now. Not in front of the maid. But when we are alone. I have wanted, he said, to hear you say it for some time. Cassander, she said. He closed his eyes. Thank you, he said. Marigold reached across the space between the two chairs, slowly and deliberately, and took his hand. I believe you, she said. I believe you about the letters. I believe you about my sister. I believe you about your mother. I believe you, Cassander, that you have been inadequate and are trying not to be. And I am very glad, for reasons I do not fully understand, that the person you are making the effort for is me. He turned his hand beneath hers so that their palms met. He did not close his fingers. He simply let her hand rest against his. 18 days, he said. 18 days, she said. And then, because she could hear Lady Merivale and her mother returning along the gravel, she let him go. It was the night after the Duke's call, and Marigold could not sleep, and her house had decided at last to sleep without her. Her mother had retired at 10, defeated by Lady Merivale, and by the 2 glasses of sherry she had consumed to recover from being defeated. Her father, who had been absent from most of the week's drama on account of a long-standing agricultural engagement in Leicestershire, had returned at 8, embraced his elder daughter with absent-minded affection, eaten cold mutton, and gone to bed. Coraland had retired early also, on the excuse of a headache, though Marigold had watched her on the stairs and judged the headache to be the fatigue of a woman whose day had gone very badly and who needed to begin planning tomorrow. Mrs. Lindewell had been dismissed at 6. She had left with a sum of money from the housekeeping drawer and an understanding that the Ashcombe household would not require her services. She had curtsied 3 times on her way out. Marigold, watching from an upper window, had almost felt sorry for her. Now it was past midnight, and the house had gone into that particular deep silence that old houses achieve when every clock has stopped at a different minute. Marigold sat in the window seat of her bedroom with a shawl around her shoulders and the window open onto the kitchen garden, and she listened to the last of the owls, and she understood, quite suddenly and without drama, that she was not going to sleep at all. She lit a candle. She left her room. The house creaked under her bare feet, in the way it always had since she was a child. She knew which board in the landing sang and which did not, and she knew that the door of the library was the only door on the ground floor with an oiled hinge. She went to the library because the library in the middle of the night was her country, and because, since her father had returned, there would be a fire banked in the grate that would still be warm. The fire was warm. The library was not empty. He was in the wing chair by the hearth, in his shirt sleeves, a glass of something amber untouched on the small table at his elbow. He was not reading. He was looking at the fire. And when she appeared in the doorway in her white nightdress and her shawl and her bare feet, candle in hand, he rose at once and said, very quietly, "I could not go home." She closed the library door behind her. "I know," she said. "Your father invited me to stay." "There was weather coming," he said, "though there is no weather. Your father is not a subtle man." "I have been given," he said, and almost smiled, "the blue room." "The blue room is at the other end of the house." "Yes." "I did not know my father had invited you to stay." "Your father," said the Duke, "finds me easier to deal with than your mother does. He has decided, I think, that if the wedding is to be advanced, he would prefer me on the premises to hurry it along. He's not romantic, your father. He is efficient." Marigold crossed the room. She set her candle down on the mantel beside his glass. The light of the fire had done to his face the thing she had noticed that afternoon, opening it, smoothing the hard lines at the corners of his mouth, and it made her chest do a small and frightening thing that she decided, for the moment, not to name. "I cannot stay long," she said. "I know. I only came for a book." "Take a book," he said. She did not take a book. She sat down on the low stool in front of the fire, her knees drawn up under the nightdress, and after a moment, very softly, he sat down on the floor beside her. It was the most improper thing she had ever done. A Duke of Harrowden did not sit on the floor. He was sitting on the floor. They did not touch. They sat perhaps 6 inches apart, and they watched the fire, and for a long time neither of them said anything. Then she said, "Cassander." "Yes." "When you said this morning that your mother advised you to marry me quickly." "Yes. Was that the only reason you wished it advanced?" He was silent for a long time. When he answered, he did not turn his head. "No," he said. "It wasn't the only reason." "What were the others?" "I have," he said, "been afraid, every hour since the morning room, that I would lose you. I was told once, by a very old man I respected, that when one has been given a great kindness unexpectedly, one should close one's hand over it quickly before the weather changes. I thought the weather was your sister. I see now that the weather was partly my own fear. I would like," he said, "to close my hand over you. I would like, very much, not to wait a further 6 weeks before I am permitted to call you my wife." Marigold looked down at her own hands, clasped around her drawn-up knees. "I should go back to my room," she said. "You should." "I am not going to." He turned his head then. He looked at her. "Marigold," he said. "I am not," she said, "going to go back to my room for a little while. I am going to sit on this floor with you and watch the fire, because tomorrow my mother will begin planning a wedding, and because my sister will begin planning against it, and because I have had for 23 years a great many nights in this house, and none of them have ever felt like tonight, and I would like this one a little longer." He did not reach for her. He said, "I would also like this one a little longer." So they stayed. They stayed until the fire had dropped by half, and the candle on the mantel had burned down by an inch, and the house beyond the library door had made no sound at all. And at some point, Marigold, without meaning to, tipped sideways against his shoulder, and his arm came up and around her, slowly, carefully, as though she were something that had landed on his sleeve, and he did not wish to startle it, and he held her there, and she did not move away. "Tell me," she said, against the linen of his shirt, "when we are married, will you write to me? Even when we are in the same house, every day," he said, "in your own hand, in my own hand, and will you read what you have written, back before you send it?" "No," he said, "never again." She smiled into his shoulder. He felt the smile. She knew he felt it, because his arm tightened, very slightly, once. Outside in the corridor, a board sang. They both heard it. They went very still. The board sang once more, and then there was silence, and then, very softly, the sound of a door closing somewhere on the landing above them. A long minute passed. "She is awake," said Marigold quietly. He did not answer at once. He was listening. "She is awake," he said, "and she has seen nothing. She cannot have seen. The library door was closed. She was upstairs. She heard only the floor, if she heard anything." "She knows," said Marigold. "Cassander. She knows. She cannot know. She does not need to know. She only needs to suspect. That is all she has ever needed." He drew her in a little closer, and he kissed the top of her head. And it was the first kiss he had given her in 3 months of engagement. And it was given not in love, but in something more urgent, in the particular tenderness of a man who has understood, in the same instant as the woman he holds, that a clock has just started in another room and is counting down toward something neither of them can yet see. "You should go," he said. "I know. Go." She rose. She took her candle from the mantel. At the door she paused, her hand on the latch, and she looked back at him, sitting on the floor of the library in his shirt sleeves, the firelight low on his face. "Cassander," she said. "Yes. Whatever she does. Yes. Do not let her make you believe that I regret this. I will not." She opened the door. The landing above was empty, but the door at the end of the corridor, Coralyn's door, stood 1 inch ajar, as though it had been closed by someone who had meant to close it entirely and had not quite managed. Marigold climbed the stairs on silent feet, and she passed her sister's door without looking at it, and she reached her own room, and she shut herself inside, and she set the candle on the washstand with hands that had begun, at last, to shake. Somewhere in the house, she knew, a letter was already being written. The letter came at 10 o'clock the next morning, and it was not, as Marigold had feared, written by her sister. It was written to her sister. It had been pushed under Coralyn's door in the hour before dawn, presumably by a footman acting on instructions, and Coralyn had opened it in bed, and she had read it once, and she had risen, and she had dressed without ringing for her maid, and she had come down the back stairs to the breakfast room with the letter in her hand and the particular flushed pallor of a person who has been given, unexpectedly, exactly what she wished for. The breakfast room was nearly empty. Marigold's father had gone out early to inspect a drainage ditch. Her mother had not yet come down. The Duke had departed at first light for Harrowden to change his linen and speak with his mother about the dinner, and he had left a note on the hall table for Marigold that read, in a hand she already knew, "I will return before 4. Keep yourself close to your father's study until I do. C." The note had been the first letter in his own hand she had ever received from him. She had read it twice in the hall. She had folded it small and placed it in the seam of her left glove, and she had gone into the breakfast room to eat toast she could not taste, which was where Coralyn found her. "Good morning, Mari," said Coralyn. "You look tired." "I am tired," said Marigold. "Have you had an interesting night?" Marigold did not look up from her cup. Coralyn sat down opposite her sister with the opened letter in her hand, and she placed it beside her plate with the written side facing up, so that Marigold, if she had leaned 6 inches to her right, could have read the salutation. Marigold did not lean. "Is that for Mama?" she asked. "No," said Coralyn. "It is for me. It came in the early post. It is from Lady Ottilie Breercliffe. She is the second cousin, by marriage, of the Duchess of Harrowden. She is a great gossip. She is also, Mari, a woman who has made herself useful to the Duchess over many years, by being the Duchess's ears in rooms the Duchess does not care to enter. She writes to me from Harrowden, where she has been a house guest this past fortnight." Marigold set down her cup. "She writes to you," she said, "from Harrowden." "She writes to me from Harrowden," said Coralyn, pleasantly, "in the early post, which means her letter was written last night. and sent last night, by a groom Lady Ottilie keeps in her personal service, and which means, Mari, that while you were, one assumes, sleeping very soundly in your bed, Lady Ottilie was walking the halls of Harrowdane at a late hour, and noting which bedrooms were lit and which were not. She has observed, for example, that the blue room at the east end of the house, which the Duchess reserves for important male guests, has been empty for the past 3 nights. It was given, she understood, to a person who did not occupy it. Marigold did not move. She tells me many things, said Coraland. She tells me that the Duke, upon arriving home, was heard by 2 servants to say that he would not be dissuaded, no matter what his mother argued. She tells me that the Duchess has begun a guest list for a dinner on the 14th of May, which she has instructed her housekeeper to prepare as if for a wedding breakfast. And she tells me, Mari, because she is a thorough correspondent, that your Duke did not return to Harrowden last night at all. He slept somewhere else. She took a small sip of tea. Where did he sleep, Mari? Marigold did not answer. It is not a difficult question, said Coraland. He slept here, did he not? In the blue room at the far end of the corridor. Papa gave it to him. The whole household knows. You need not blush. You need not deny it. I am asking only where he slept, not where he spent his evening. I do not know what you think you are asking, Marigold said very steadily, but I will not answer it. Oh, Mari, said her sister, you already have. The letter lay between them on the white cloth. Marigold could see, now, a phrase on the second line, very plainly, the letters formed with the careful clarity of a woman who wrote to be understood. Our mutual friend was troubled last night. Her son, she says, cannot resist. He spent the night as she feared he would. Marigold rose. You will not, she said, send this letter to anyone. I have no intention of sending this letter to anyone, said Coraland, looking up at her with wide, injured, perfectly composed eyes. Mari, what a thing to suggest. I only wanted you to know that your business is not as private as you believe it is. I wanted you, she said, to have the opportunity to reconsider. Reconsider what? The engagement, said Coraland. You asked me that yesterday. Yes, and yesterday you said no. I am giving you, today, and another opportunity. Because today, Mari, I am in possession of a letter, and because it is perfectly possible, without my ever sending this letter anywhere, for its contents to reach the drawing rooms of this county by supper. A phrase here, an aside there. I can do all this, Mari, without ever telling a lie, and your Duke's reputation will not survive it, and yours will not survive it, and Papa will have to sell the South Meadow to pay for the scandal. She stirred her tea. Or, she said, you can release him. Write the notice this morning. Send it to the Chronicle. It is still your power. You have not yet lost it. Marigold looked down at her sister. She saw, for the first time in her life, exactly what her sister was. It was not hatred. It was not even quite envy. It was a kind of terrible arithmetic. Coraland had added up the sums of 2 lives and had determined that they did not balance, and she had decided, years ago perhaps, that the imbalance must be corrected, and the correction had now reached the point of a letter on a breakfast table. Coraland, said Marigold. Yes, I am going to say this once. All right. You are not my sister. Coraland's spoon stilled in the cup. You were my sister when we were children, said Marigold. You were my sister when we wore the same muslin. You were my sister when I pulled you out of the pond at Kettleston. You are no longer my sister. A sister does not sit at a breakfast table with a letter designed to ruin the person opposite her and call it an opportunity. A sister does not invent a dead soldier's grief to make a man distrust his bride. You may live in this house. You may share my mother's face. You may keep my father's name. But you are not my sister, Coralind, and you will never be again." She turned, and she left the room. In the hall she stopped. Her hands were shaking. She took out the note. 4 o'clock, she thought, was 6 hours away. 6 hours was enough time for a letter to reach London. He did not return at 4. By 3 in the afternoon, the house was quiet in the particular, pressured way. A house becomes quiet when its occupants have agreed, without speaking of it, to pretend that nothing unusual is occurring. Marigold's mother had come down at noon, discovered her daughters at opposite ends of the morning room reading books. Neither of them was reading, and asked no questions. Her father had returned from the drainage ditch, eaten cold beef, and retired to his study. Coralind had spent the entire morning writing letters at the small desk in the window, in full view of her sister, with the lid of the writing box open so that Marigold could see, each time her sister drew a fresh sheet, that there was still a great deal of paper remaining. At 3:30, Marigold went to the window. The drive was empty. At 3:45, a servant came to the door with a note. Marigold opened it in the hall. It was not from the Duke. It was from Lady Merivale. It read in the firm hand of a woman who wrote as she walked, "The Duke is delayed by a matter of family business. He is not, I assure you, injured. The Duchess has moved the dinner to tonight. The carriage has been sent. You will be in it within the hour. Bring your sister. Bring your mother. Bring your father. Leave nothing behind that you cannot afford to leave forever." Marigold read the note twice. Then she walked into her father's study without knocking, and she held it out to him, and she said, "Papa, I need to speak with you." Her father read the note. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight. Good God. Why?" "Because Coralind has a letter," said Marigold. Her father looked at his elder daughter for a long moment. Then he said, "Is it a letter that would embarrass us?" "It is a letter," said Marigold, "that would end the engagement and the families standing in this county for a generation." "Is it true?" "It is," she said, "technically accurate." "Ah," he said. He tapped his fingers on the blotter once. "Well," he said, "we had best go to Harrowden then. Go and tell your mother. Tell her to wear the blue. If Coralind asks, tell her that her presence is required. I will not have her left behind to spread a letter through an empty house." Marigold did not move. "You knew," she said. "What?" "You knew about last night, about the library." Her father looked at his hands. "I did not know," he said, "about a library. I guessed, perhaps, about a young man who could not sleep, and a young woman who could not sleep in the same house as him. And I asked no questions, because I have been a father long enough to know that there are questions one doesn't ask on a Tuesday if one intends to walk one's daughter down an aisle on a Saturday. Harrowden is a good man. I have known him since he was a boy. One takes one's sons-in-law as one takes one's weather, and he is better weather than I had a right to expect. Go and dress." She went. Her mother, upon being told that the whole family was to depart for Harrowden within the hour, and that Coralind was to come, wept for perhaps 90 seconds, and then recovered, because she had reached the age at which she understood that crying did not change a timetable. She put on the blue. She put on the amethysts her own mother had left her. She sat in the carriage opposite her elder daughter and beside her younger one, and she did not speak for the entire journey, and Marigold understood, looking at her, that her mother knew. Her mother had always known. Her mother had simply preferred, for reasons of her own, not to see. They reached Harrowden at 6:15. The great house was lit from end to end. Carriages were arriving in a line down the long avenue. Marigold, stepping down into the gravel sweep, understood with a clarity that made her ribs ache that this was not the small dinner of 30 families that the Duke had described to her the day before. This was the whole county. This was every drawing room that mattered within a day's ride. This was not a dinner. This was a declaration. The Duchess of Harrowden was waiting for her in the marble hall. She was a small woman in gray silk, with her son's winter water eyes and none of his softness. She crossed to Marigold without ceremony, took both her hands and said, in a voice pitched for Marigold's ear alone, "You will sit on my son's right. You will speak to no one before the soup. Your sister will sit between my cousin and the Bishop of Westbury. She will not be served the wine she asks for. She will be served the wine I wish her to have. Are we understood?" "Yes," Marigold said. "Good," said the Duchess. "My son will arrive within the half-hour." Smile, Miss Ashcombe. You are about to be looked at by a great many women who have come here to watch you fail. I would prefer that they watched you succeed. Marigold smiled. They went in. The long dining room at Harrowden was the length of 2 ballrooms end to end, and the table had been dressed with white roses and silver and glass, and the candles had been lit in such quantity that the mirrors at each end doubled the light and sent it back down the room like the nave of a church. Marigold had eaten at this table twice in her life. She had never seen it like this. The soup was served. The Duke had not arrived. The fish was served. The Duke had not arrived. Between every course, the Duchess made conversation with her neighbors with the pleasantness of a woman who had never permitted an unease to reach her face, and Marigold admired her for it, because Marigold herself was, beneath the table, gripping the edge of her own chair with both hands. At the far end of the table, Marigold saw her sister, seated between an elderly cousin and the bishop. Coraland was wearing the palest lavender. She was beautiful. She was also, Marigold saw with a cold and detached attention, watching the door. She was waiting for something. Between the fish and the game, Coraland set down her glass. She touched the bishop's sleeve with the apologetic grace of a young woman who had just remembered something important. She rose, gathered her skirts, and asked, in a clear, carrying voice, whether she might be permitted to say a few words before the main course was served. It was, she said, a matter of some delicacy. It concerned her sister. She had not, she said, been able to find the right moment to raise it in private. She hoped very much that those present would forgive her for raising it in public. The room went still. Coraland took a letter from her reticule. "I have received," she began, with tears already shining in her pale eyes, "a correspondence from a friend in Bath, who writes to me with a great deal of distress. I cannot, in good conscience, sit at this table, among these good people, and say nothing. My sister, whom I love, has been placed in a situation." The double doors at the far end of the dining room opened. The Duke of Harrowden walked in. He walked the length of the room without hurry. He was still in his traveling clothes. His boots were dusted with the road. His hair was disarranged by the wind, and there was a thin line of fatigue along his jaw. And he did not look at Marigold as he came, and he did not look at the Duchess, and he did not look at the 43 faces turned in astonishment toward him as he passed. He looked only at Coraland Ashcombe, standing at the far side of the table with a letter open in her hand. He stopped 3 paces from her. "Miss Ashcombe," he said. Coraland's mouth had opened, and it stayed open. The letter in her hand was trembling very slightly, though her face, by some discipline Marigold could not help but admire, had arranged itself into the precise expression of a young woman interrupted in a sacred errand. "Your Grace," she said. "I was about to speak." "So I observed," said the Duke. "I beg your pardon for my entrance. I was delayed by a matter of law. I have spent the day in London with my solicitor. I have brought back with me, he said, some papers which I will share with this table presently. First, however, I would like, with your permission, to address the letter in your hand. Coraline's fingers closed on the letter. It is a private correspondence, she said. It is not, said the Duke, a private correspondence any longer. You were about to read it aloud to 43 people. I am asking you, respectfully, to read it aloud now. I would like the bishop, in particular, to hear it. The Bishop of Westbury, seated 2 places from Coraline, cleared his throat and looked at his plate. Coraline did not read. The Duke waited. He was, Marigold observed with a strange, floating detachment. Very calm. He had the composure of a man who had spent the whole of a carriage journey deciding precisely how this conversation would go, and had now arrived at the first of its planned hinges. He was not angry. He was, if anything, courteous. He was courteous in the way a judge is courteous when pronouncing a sentence. Miss Ashcombe, he said, read it. I cannot, said Coraline. You cannot read aloud a letter you were about to read aloud. I have changed my mind. I see, said the Duke. Then may I? He held out his hand. Coraline did not give him the letter. Marigold, at the Duchess's right, sat perfectly still. Somewhere behind her, a footman set down a soup tureen with the soundlessness of a man who had been trained in silences. No one else in the room was moving. The Duchess's own hand had gone to her throat, where it rested very lightly, and Marigold saw that the Duchess was breathing in the shallow, measured way of a woman who had rehearsed for a crisis and was now discovering that the crisis was arriving on cue. May I? The Duke said again, more quietly. Coraline gave him the letter. He did not open it. He held it in his left hand, flat, as though it were a small object of no importance. He turned, and he walked, still at his unhurried pace, back along the length of the room, past the 43 faces, past Lady Merivale, who had half risen from her chair, past the bishop, who was studying a pattern on his plate, past Marigold's father, who sat with his napkin still over his knee, and his jaw locked in a way Marigold had seen only once before in her life, at her grandfather's funeral. The Duke stopped beside the marble hearth at the far end of the room, where a low fire had been lit against the damp of the evening, and he turned to face the table. He held up the letter. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, my bride's sister has written, over the course of the past week, 3 letters she has caused to be placed in my hands, my mother's hands, and her sister's hands, each containing a different version of the same story. I have, at considerable expense, established the authorship of a 4th letter, which she received this morning from a person she believes to be a friend, and which, I regret to inform her, was in fact dictated by my mother's butler, and written by my mother's housekeeper for the specific purpose of causing her to reveal, before this company, the use to which she intended to put her correspondence. She has this evening done us the great service of revealing it. He opened the letter. He did not read it. He placed it very deliberately into the fire. The paper caught. It curled. It went white, then gold, then black. And Marigold watched it go, and she did not breathe. This letter, said the Duke, doesn't exist. It will not be mentioned again in any room in this county. Any person who attempts to mention it will find that they are mistaken in their recollection. They will find that their hostesses do not recall them. They will find that their invitations have been lost in the post. I do not make this statement as a threat. I make it as a forecast. No one spoke. He turned his head at last to look at Marigold. Miss Ashcombe, he said. Marigold rose. He came back down the length of the room to her. He did not hurry now either. He stopped in front of her chair, and he held out his hand, and Marigold took it, And he raised her hand to his lips, and he kissed the back of it, and he held it there a second longer than politeness required. "I was going to ask you," he said, "when we were alone tonight, whether you would forgive me for the noise this evening. I find I would rather ask you now. Will you forgive me?" "Yes," she said. He turned, still holding her hand, to face the table. "I have," he said, "also to announce to this company a change. My mother has been good enough to invite you here on short notice. She led you, I believe, to expect the announcement of a new wedding date. I must correct her. There will not be a new wedding date. There will be a wedding. Tomorrow morning, at 10 o'clock, in the chapel of this house, by special license obtained today in London, Miss Marigold Ashcombe will marry me. You are all invited. You are all required. The alternative," he said, with the faintest flicker of humor, "is that you go home and explain to your households why you were not." There was a sound in the room that was not quite a gasp. It was the sound, Marigold thought, of 43 people simultaneously deciding that they had never thought anything else. "And my sister-in-law," said the Duke, still not releasing Marigold's hand, "will, at her own request, be departing for an extended stay with her aunt in Tunbridge Wells. Her carriage leaves at 7 in the morning. I am told the roads are excellent at this season." Coraland, standing at the far end of the room with her empty hand still slightly raised, did not speak. She sat down, very slowly, in the chair that had been pulled out for her by a footman who had materialized at her elbow with the exactness of a man who had received his instructions an hour earlier, and she placed her hands in her lap, and she did not lift her eyes. Marigold, watching her, understood that her sister had not only lost, her sister had been foreseen. Every choice Coraland had made, from the first visit to Harrowdon, had been a choice the Duke had arranged for her to make. The letter at breakfast had not been a trap she had stumbled into. It had been a trap built around her at a distance by a man who had decided, very quietly, that he would not be the one taken by surprise. The Duchess of Harrowdon raised her glass. "To my son," she said, "and to his wife." The room rose. The room drank, and Marigold Ashcombe stood with her hand in the hand of the Duke of Harrowdon, and she understood that she was going to be married in the morning, and that the woman who had tried to destroy her had just been silenced not by a scene, but by the slow, exact, deliberate weight of a man who had chosen her in front of everyone and would not be turned. He bent his head to her ear. "I wrote to you from London today," he said. "A letter. In my own hand. I did not read it back. It is in the inside pocket of my coat. I will give it to you tonight." She closed her eyes. It was not a simple thing to marry a duke in a morning. The household at Harrowdon had been given a quarter of an hour of warning, and in that quarter of an hour, the housekeeper had transformed from a woman presiding over a dinner into a woman preparing a wedding breakfast for 50. The head gardener had been sent out with 2 footmen and a lantern to cut white lilac at 9:30 in the evening. The vicar of the Harrowdon Chapel, who was a cousin of the Duchess, had been roused by a groom and informed that he would be performing a ceremony at 10 in the morning. He had, by all accounts, laughed for some time, accepted a glass of brandy, and agreed. Marigold's father had said only, "I will go back to Ashcombe tonight and fetch my wife's grandmother's pearls. I do not trust them in a carriage in the morning." He had pressed his daughter's shoulder once, very briefly, with his whole hand, and he had left. Her mother, upon being informed that her daughter would be married in less than 12 hours, had wept for approximately 3 minutes, recovered, and begun writing, with the methodical purpose of a woman raised for exactly this, a list of persons to be told. Marigold had been given, at 10 at night, a blue bedroom in the wing traditionally reserved for the women of the family. She had been undressed by a maid she had never seen before, put into a nightdress that was not her own, and left with a single low candle and the letter from the Duke's coat. She opened it. He had written in black ink, in a hand that sloped forward as though hurrying to keep up with itself, "Marigold. I am writing this in London, in a tavern near the Inns of Court, while my solicitor finishes the license. I will not read it back. I would lose my courage. I have loved you since the long gallery. I did not know it was love. I knew only that when you laughed at my grandmother's portrait, I felt for the first time in my life that a room I was standing in had become mine. I have been a poor man to marry. I will try, every day of what remains to me, to be a better one. I am afraid, tonight, of one thing only, which is that when you wake tomorrow, you will have reconsidered. If you do, you must send me word, and I will not be in the chapel at 10, and you will not be disgraced. But if you come, Marigold, I will be there. I will be there even if the chapel is empty. I will be there even if no one else in the county has come. I will be there alone with the vicar, and I will wait for you until noon. After noon, I will still be there. I do not believe I will move. See." She read it 3 times. She folded it. She slept with it under her cheek, and she did not cry, because she had said she did not cry, and she was a woman who kept her word to herself. In the morning, she was married in a white gown that had been her mother-in-law's, taken in with pins by the Duchess's own woman before dawn. She walked down the chapel aisle on the arm of a father who had driven through the night to bring her his wife's grandmother's pearls. She stood beside a man who, when she reached him, took her hand so quickly and so gratefully that the vicar lost his place in the book. The vows were the usual vows. They did not feel usual. When the vicar pronounced them, the Duchess of Harrowdown, from the first pew, lifted her veil and wept, silently, as if she had been saving it up for some time. It was the only time in the 9 months of her acquaintance with her new mother-in-law that Marigold ever saw the Duchess cry, and the Duchess herself denied it afterward to anyone who mentioned it. And Lady Merivale, who had been seated beside her, confirmed the denial with the serene authority of a woman who had long ago decided that the truth was whatever the Duchess said it was. Coraland was not in the chapel. Coraland was, by that hour, already 12 miles down the road to Tunbridge Wells, in a carriage provided by the Duke, with a maid she had not chosen, and a letter to Aunt Harriet she had not read, and a second letter, sealed, to be opened by Aunt Harriet only if Coraland ever attempted to return to the Ashcombe house without invitation. The second letter contained, among other things, a settlement. It was not, in the end, ungenerous. It was merely final. The wedding breakfast was held in the Long Gallery. It was the same Long Gallery in which, 4 years before, a 19-year-old Marigold Ashcombe had stood beneath the portrait of the Duke's grandmother and laughed at a joke about a spaniel, and a 25-year-old Cassander Finch, newly introduced to her, had decided without knowing he had decided that the room he was standing in had, with her laugh, become his. Between the toasts, Marigold turned to him. "You said," she said, "you would be there even if the chapel was empty." "I would," he said, "even if no one came, even if no one came, even if I did not." He was quiet for a moment. "I was not," he said, "going to write that part. I was not going to tell you that I would have waited anyway, but I did not read it back, and it wrote itself." She took his hand beneath the gallery table. "I came," she said. "I know," he said. "Then do not ever again," she said. "Tell me that you were afraid I would not." "I will not," he said. "Promise." "I promise." The scandal, when it arrived, was not the scandal Marigold had feared. It came 2 weeks into the marriage, in the form of a letter from an elderly and embittered cousin of the Ashcombe family, who had heard, at a card party in Bath, a version of the events at Harrowdine that differed significantly from the true one. In this version, the Duchess had burned a letter in order to conceal an affair. The Duke had ridden to London to suppress a scandal that had grown larger than a carriage could carry, and the younger Miss Ashcombe had been exiled to Tunbridge Wells to preserve a family secret that would, if told, bring down a dukedom. It was, Marigold discovered when she read the letter to her husband over breakfast in the East Room at Harrowdine, an extraordinarily detailed version. It named dates, it named rooms, it named the shade of lavender Coralind had worn at the dinner. It even got, with a malicious accuracy, the color of the ribbon she had worn in her hair the night before. Cassander read the letter twice. Then he set it down beside his teacup, and he looked out through the long window at the lawn, and he said, "Lady Ottilie Brearcliffe." "Yes," said Marigold. "We have not," he said, "entirely solved the problem of Lady Ottilie Brearcliffe." "No," said Marigold, "we have not." He tapped the letter on the table once. "Write to your sister," he said. Marigold set down her cup. "What?" "Write to your sister." "Not today. Next week. Write her a short letter. Ask her how she does. Send her a piece of family news. Tell her, if you can manage it, that you have been thinking of her. She will answer. She will answer because she cannot bear not to know what goes on in your house. You want me to write to her?" "I want you," he said, "to cut Lady Ottilie Brearcliffe off from her source." Marigold understood slowly. "Coralind is her source," she said. "Lady Ottilie has not a thought in her head that Coralind did not put there," said the Duke. "Coralind is, among other things, an inexhaustible correspondent. She has been feeding Lady Ottilie for a month. The dinner has not stopped her. Exile has not stopped her. Only you can stop her." "How?" "By writing," he said, "as though you had forgiven her." Marigold did not speak for a long moment. "I have not forgiven her," she said. "I am aware. I do not know that I ever will. I am also aware." Then he said, "You will write a letter that you do not mean. It will be a short letter. It will be kind. It will do, Marigold, one specific thing, which is to persuade your sister that she still has access to you. As long as she believes she has access to you, she will tell Lady Ottilie nothing. She will be saving her ammunition for a precise occasion of her choosing. While she waits, Lady Ottilie will run out of material. The stories will grow thinner. Within 3 months, they will have no market. Within a year, he said, they will be regarded as the tedious inventions of a tedious woman, and your sister will be, not forgiven, but forgotten, which is very much worse." Marigold looked at him across the breakfast table. "You are," she said, "a frightening man." "I am," he said, "a practical one." She wrote the letter. It was 3 lines long. She told Coralind that the lilac was in bloom at Harrowdine, and that the Duchess had planted a new rose against the south wall. She told her that their mother had finally replaced the fast clock in the morning room with one that kept time, which was a loss in its way. She signed it, "Your sister, Marigold." She signed it "Your sister" because her husband had told her, very gently, that the ink in a letter did not have to match the ink in a heart. Coralind answered within the week. Her answer was 4 pages long. It was full of news. It contained 3 falsehoods and 4 sly wounds, and 1 entirely accidental observation that gave Cassander, when Marigold showed it to him, everything he needed to have Lady Ottilie Brearcliffe removed, without cruelty and without scandal, from the guest list of every significant house in the western counties. Lady Ottilie, within 3 months, had retired to lodgings in Hastings. Within a year, when Marigold encountered the name at a dinner and had to search her memory for it, she realized, with a peculiar, clean feeling, that her sister had ceased to be a weapon. She had merely become, at last, what she had always feared she was. She had become uninteresting. 2 years later, on a morning in mid-April, 2 years to the day since the night of the dinner at which the Duke of Harrowdene had silenced a room and chosen his wife before 43 witnesses, Marigold stood at the foot of the long gallery at Harrowdene, in a morning dress of pale yellow, and she watched her husband at the other end of the room arguing pleasantly with the head gardener about the correct angle at which to stake a young apricot tree. The long gallery had been cleaned for the anniversary dinner. The portraits had been dusted. The Reynolds of Cassander's grandmother, whom Marigold had long ago stopped disliking and had begun, in a private and unhurried way, to feel affectionate toward, had been rehung half an inch to the left to suit a new piece of furniture the Duchess had sent down from London. The spaniel beside the grandmother was unchanged. Cassander, winning his argument with the head gardener, came back down the gallery toward her. He was in his shirt sleeves. His hair was a little disarranged by the wind from the open south door. He still, after 2 years, looked at her in the way he had looked at her the morning of the yew walk, as though he were mildly astonished that he had been permitted to. "Wool gathering," he said. "I was thinking about the morning room," she said. "Which morning room?" "The yellow one, at Ashcombe, with the fast clock." He stopped beside her. "The one where you tried to release me," he said. "The one where I failed," she said. He laughed. "Did you fail?" he said. "I did," she said. "I meant to walk out of that room a woman without a fiancé. I walked out of it a woman who had accidentally agreed to let you tell her something the next morning." He took her hand. "I was going to let you," he said. "Let me what?" "Release me." That morning, I stood in that room, and I watched you rise, and I thought, if she walks out of this room now, I will let her go. And then you said what you said about the list my mother had approved, and something in me, he said, decided. Decided what? Decided that I could not let you go because I had already, somewhere along the way, chosen you, and the choice was not actually reversible. Marigold looked down at their joined hands. "My sister said," she said slowly, "that morning at the breakfast table that I had no choice, that the Ashcombes had never given me one, that my only agency was whether to let it happen with a gracious face or a bitter one." He did not answer. "She was wrong," Marigold said. "I had a choice. I had a choice in the morning room. I had a choice on the yew bench. I had a choice in the library. I had a choice in the chapel at 10. A woman who has been underestimated all her life has learned, by long practice, how to choose without asking permission." "Cassander," she said. "Yes. I chose you. I chose you in the morning room when I did not know I was choosing you. I chose you in the chapel. I have chosen you every morning since. I am going to keep choosing you, I think. I cannot seem to stop." He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Nor I you." Outside the long window, the head gardener had gone back to his apricot tree, and was, for a third time, setting it at the angle the Duke had told him was wrong. Somewhere beyond the south lawn, a peacock called. The old peacock from Ashcombe, who had been brought to Harrowdene as a wedding gift from her father, because her mother had said, in a moment of unusual sentiment, that the bird had watched her elder daughter grow up and ought not to miss her. The peacock had been renamed, after long debate, the Bishop, for reasons that had not survived being explained. A man, Cassander said after a while, does not often get to watch the person he loves choose him twice. Twice. Once in the morning room. Once just now. "Oh," said Marigold, "I have chosen you more than twice." "I know," he said. "I was being poetic. You are never poetic." "I am, sometimes. On anniversaries. In yellow galleries. When my wife is wearing a pale yellow dress, and the light is coming in at the south door in that particular way. She leaned against his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time, while the gardener argued with his tree, and the peacock called, and the dust of 2 years settled. In the slow and gracious way dust settles, in houses that have been loved, across the floor of the long gallery, where 6 years earlier, a young woman had laughed at a portrait of a spaniel, and a young man had understood, without understanding, that his life had been rearranged. The fast clock, Marigold thought, had been right all along. She had not been at war with the hour. She had been waiting for it. She had only needed, in the end, to recognize it when it struck. Thank you for staying with Marigold and Cassander to the end of their story. If anything in it has moved you, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, because there are more stories waiting, more impossible families, more stubborn loves, more quiet choices that look like accidents, until you see, from the other end of your life, that they were never accidents at all. Thank you for being here. Your attention is the only reason these stories continue to be told.